Let's talk about some very important cybersecurity principles, and this would be terms, technologies, or practices that you will encounter throughout your journey as a cybersecurity professional. Now, there is a term that you should be aware of because it's used all the time, and that term is non-repudiation. This basically refers to the inability to deny having sent a message. It is used all the time, and to a certain extent, does help to guarantee a certain level of accountability. Now, access control. This is one of the core pillars of cybersecurity as a whole. This defines the degree of permission granted to a resource. Now, this resource could be data, it could be a file, it could even be a server, a computer system, and so on. Now, generally, there are three parts to access control. You have the identification part, basically who is the subject, who is trying to access this file. You've got authentication, which would be the proof of identity. Can the subject prove that they are who they claim to be? And finally, you have the authorization, which comes after authentication. This would be the permissions granted to the user or the subject or whoever is trying to access that resource. Now, there are also authentication types that you should be aware of. The first one here would be something that you know. Typically would be a password, a key phrase, things like that. And then it could be something that you have, something physical like a key card, a security key. It could also be something that you are, biometrics, basically your fingerprint, your eye scan. And then we could also combine these different authentication types to form something known as the multi-factor authentication type. So you could have a security system where the subject will have to know something, maybe a password, plus they will also have to, have their fingerprint or eye scan taken before they can be granted access to the resource. We've also got authentication models. There are about 5 or 6 of them, but I'm going to focus on the top 3 ones, the 3 main ones, right? The first one here would be the mandatory access control, otherwise known as the MAC, not to be confused with the MAC address of a computer. But basically, in your MAC, each subject and object, by the way, the subject here would be the person trying to access the data would be the object, right? So each subject and object will have a set of security attributes. Now, these attributes would be inspected by the authentication server or whatever system is in charge of the authentication whenever that subject wants to access the object. And then it will decide whether access should be granted or denied. It is very, very strict. So basically, if subject A wants to access object B, subject A will need to have the security attributes that would allow it to access object B. And likewise, object B would also need to have the security attributes that would allow it to be accessed by subject A. So again, it's very, very strict. But we also have the discretionary access control, DAC, where a subject with certain levels of permissions can actually transfer those permissions to another subject. So it's discretionary. One of the best examples would be an admin on a platform or on a system making another user an admin. It happens all the time. The last one here is going to be the role-based access control, where subjects are granted permissions based on their role. So as an example, you could have the role of an editor that can edit and post blog articles, but you could also have an author who might be able to edit articles but will not be able to post the articles themselves. That's basically what the role-based access control is. Now, before I round this up, I want to leave you with something very, very important. Maybe this is a phenomenon, or I'm not quite sure what the right English word would be to describe this, but generally, the softer the ease of access, the less secure, and the more secure, the harder the ease of access. My point here is that when it comes to cybersecurity, there is always this constant trade-off between ease of access and security. Generally, the easier it is for you to access a file system or data, then in most cases, it's usually not that secure, right? However, the harder it is for you to access that data or that system, then usually the more secure it would be. Like going back, for example, to the authentication types. If you have a system that deploys just one, maybe something that you know, all you need to do is just enter your password and you're in, it might be secured, but to a very small extent. Of course, the ease of access is it's easy, just add your password and you're in. But on another platform where you have to provide a password, you also need to have a security key, and then you also need to provide your iScan. The ease of access is difficult because you have to provide all these three things, but as a result, it is also a lot more secure. So this is something that you will constantly face as a cybersecurity professional, the trade-off between ease of access and the higher levels of security. So that's it for the key principles of cybersecurity. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next class.